you cultists send me so many books that I can scarcely walk into my own library. And so I'm reading so many now, because I never throw one away, I at least skim. And so I've gotten sort of like a kaleidoscope with the books. I just read this new book by Thorpe, the guy who beat the dealer in Las Vegas. And then he did computer algorithm trading. And I really liked the book. For one thing, the guy had a very good marriage, and he seemed grateful for it, and it was touching. For another, he's a very smart man. He was a mathematician using a high IQ to A, beat the dealer in Las Vegas and so forth, and then B, use these computer algorithms to do this massive trading. And I found it very interesting, and since some of you people are nerds, and maybe like a buried love story, I recommend Thorpe's new book. It's an interesting thing to do, to beat the dealer in Las Vegas. You know, they were wearing disguises and so on. And Peter Kaufman told me a story about somebody he knows. Did the same thing as Thorpe did, except he did it more extreme. He wore disguises and so forth. He won $4 million, I think, in the casinos. You know, and that was hard to do because the casinos don't like playing against people who might win. And then maybe it was 40 million, whatever it was. Then he went into the stock market, where he made $4 billion. Again, clever algorithms, and you know, these people are mathematically gifted, and they sifted. So it's still going on, and I don't think many of you are going to do it. There can't be many people who are mathematically gifted enough and manipulate statistics and everything else so well that they find little algorithms that will make them $4 billion. But there are a few, and so some of them started just like Thorpe. So Thorpe's book is interesting, and I recommend it to you.
Well, oh, the books. Charlie, what are you reading these days?
Well, I'm almost ashamed to report because I've gone back and picked up the part of biology that I should have picked up 10 or 15 years earlier. And if any of you haven't done it, it's a total circus what they figured out over the last 20 or 30 years in biology. And if you take Dawkins, The Selfish Gene, and The Blind Watchmaker, I mean, these are marvelous books, and there are words in those books that are entering the English language, that are going to be in the next Oxford dictionary. I mean, these are powerful books, and they're a lot of fun. I had to read The Selfish Gene twice before I fully understood it, and there were things I believed all my life that weren't so. And I think it's just wonderful when you have those experiences. We always say it isn't the learning that's so hard, it's the unlearning.
Yeah. I made the mistake of taking Charlie up to Microsoft in December, and he became friends with Nathan Myhrvold, and they are corresponding back and forth with increasing fervor and enthusiasm about mole rats, and they copy me on all these communications, so I'm getting to see this flow back and forth on the habits of mole rats. And I really haven't found a way to apply it at Berkshire, but I'm sure Charlie has got something he's working on that. He's gotten very interested in biology lately. I've always liked reading biography, but since the computer's changed my life, I now find myself playing bridge on the computer about 10 hours a week, and unfortunately, I didn't want to give up sleep or eating or Berkshire, so the reading has been kind of light. On investment books, if you're asking about that, I would recommend the first two books that Phil Fisher wrote back around 1960, Common Sense and Uncommon Profits, and the second one. They're very good books. You know, I obviously recommend first and foremost The Intelligent Investor, with chapters 8 and 20 are the ones that you really should read. All of the important ideas in investing really are in that book, because there's only about 3 ideas, and those two of them are emphasized in those 2 chapters. Actually, I think John Crane's Money Masters is an interesting book. I don't know, can you think of any others, Charlie, that we want to tout?
I don't know. We have such a fingers and toes style around Berkshire Hathaway. We just sort of count. And I've never seen, Warren talks about these discounted cash flows. I've never seen him do one.
Yeah.
If it isn't,
there are some things you only do in private, Charlie.
If it isn't pluperfect obvious that it's going to work out well if you do the calculation, he tends to go on to the next idea.
Yeah, it's sort of it is true. You don't if you have to actually do it with pencil and paper, it's too close to think about. I mean, it ought to just kind of scream at you that you've got this huge margin of safety. I mentioned the three ideas. The three ideas I should elaborate on. One is to think of yourself, to think of investing as owning a business and not buying something that wiggles around in price. And the second one is your attitude, which ties in with that, the attitude toward the market. That's covered in Chapter 8. And if you have the proper attitude toward market movements, it's an enormous help in securities. And the final chapter is on the margin of safety, which means don't try and drive a 9,800-pound truck over a bridge that says, capacity 10,000 pounds, but go down the road a little bit and find one that says capacity 15,000 pounds.
Jared Diamond is, to me, very interesting. I think Guns, Germs, and Steels was one of the great books written. But the main point was wrong. Jared really believes that the people in New Guinea were just like a bunch of literate Jews in Berlin in 1890, except that they wore loin cloths and were illiterate. But that's a delusion. The genetic evolution continues to work after you get a civilization, and man's breeding patterns will
reinforce it.
Will reinforce and accelerate and change. But the genetic evolution doesn't go away, and it's really stepped up. That's why all these dogs are so different when they're all descendants of the wolf. I mean, what you can do to change nature when you start breeding with some selectivity, and so at any rate, I can understand why he was wrong on that, because he lives in academia and it's not politically correct to accept there could ever be any genetic difference between individuals. If you notice that Zulus are taller than pygmies, they just look at you like you're spat in the fireplace. And it's a social error. But they don't say that they're exactly the same height. They just look at you with detestation. But the truth of the matter is that part of the problem with the United States is that we are now competing with some people who have some considerable genetic advantages over us. They're called Chinese. I don't know why the Chinese, mired in a Malthusian trap and under an idiotic system of government, got a genetic mix that was so good on capitalism when it was unleashed. That's a very interesting question. But some kind of selective breeding happened over there. I see my friends adopt these Chinese girls who are utterly discarded from the remote hinterlands. And
one of my granddaughters.
Well, I've now seen a sample that's so great. I say I'm not like this idiot professor at Stanford who, 6 sigmas of luck. There's a reason why these girls are working out so well. In many cases, way better than the people who had their own children. And we are starting to have a very major competition with a group of people who, on average, have some genetic advantage over us. I happen to like it. If the Chinese displace the Mungers, some of whom are here tonight, my attitude is bon voyage.
Hello, my name is Everett Puri. I'm from Atlanta, Georgia, and I have two questions. One is for Mr. Munger in our never-ending effort to have the Munger Book Club surpass the Oprah Book Club. I was wondering if you could make some recommendations.
Yeah.
The second is, it seems that with the pharmaceutical industry earlier, that the threat of government regulation or government appropriation of those cash flows led to a reasonable market opportunity. And the same thing with Sallie Mae. And I'm wondering if you feel that that's going on with the tobacco industry now, or if that is a larger threat to that industry, larger and permanent threat.
Well, number one, the books. Hagstrom sent me chapters of his latest book on Warren Buffett called The Buffett Portfolio, and I didn't read them because I thought his first book was a respectable book but didn't contribute too much to human knowledge. And at any rate, he sent me the second book, a full version, and I read it, and I was flabbergasted to find it not only very well written, but a considerable contribution to the synthesis of human thought on the investment process. And I would recommend that all of you buy a copy of Hagstrom's second Buffett book. I noticed the airport was heavily promoting it, and it's called the Warren Buffett Portfolio. It doesn't pick any stocks for you, but it does illuminate how the investment process really works if you think about it rationally. Another book that I liked very much this year was Titan, the biography of the original John D. Rockefeller. That's one of the best business biographies I have ever read. It is, and it's a very interesting family story too. That is just a wonderful, wonderful book, and I don't know anybody who's read it who hasn't enjoyed it. So I would certainly recommend that latest biography of John D. Rockefeller I. The third book is sort of a revisitation of the subject matter of the book I recommended a year or two ago called Guns, Germs, and Steel, which was a physiologist's view of the economic history of man. And it was a wonderful book. And much of that same territory has now been covered by an emeritus history professor from Harvard who just knows way more economics and science than is common for a history professor, and that gives him better insight. And his book is a takeoff in title on Adam Smith, and the title is The Wealth and Poverty of Nations, and the guy's name is Landis. So I would heartily recommend those three books. Now, what was the third question?
The other question was about tobacco and pharmaceuticals.
Oh, tobacco. Mm-hmm. I don't know about Warren, but I think the legislative threat to tobacco is serious, and I haven't the faintest idea of how to predict it.
Yeah, I would say that there's no comparison between the threat to tobacco currently with the threat to pharmaceuticals in 1993, that the problems of the tobacco companies are of a far different order than the problems of the pharmaceutical companies. Nobody was against pharmaceuticals. They were just had different ideas about maybe pricing and distribution and all of that. But tobacco is a different story. So, I mean, tobacco companies, well, you can figure it out for yourself. In terms of books, I would recommend. Many of you may have read it, but this goes back more than a year. But I would, if you haven't read Katharine Graham's autobiography, it is one terrific book. It's a very incredibly honest book, and it's a fascinating story. I mean, it's a life that's seen all kinds of things in politics and in business and in government. It's a great read. A book that came out just in the last few months in the investment world that I would certainly recommend everybody is Common Sense on Mutual Funds by Jack Bogle.
Jack is an honest guy, and he knows the business, and if mutual fund investors listened to him, they would save billions and billions of dollars a year, and he tells it exactly like it is. So he asked me for a blurb on the book, and I was delighted to provide it.
And 3, it would begin to remedy the stunted educations of those, like Mr. Munger, are plunging along with ordinary will, with time to improve ourselves. Thank you.
Well, of course, Peter Kaufman has tried to do that in that book that he stitched together out of my old speeches, plus a lot else. And I didn't want to do it. And he went and saw Warren, and Warren got enthusiastic, and Warren suggested this ridiculous name, Poor Charlie's Almanac, and me to do it. But the whole idea of doing it is with just the motivation you're talking about. I think if you assimilate everything in that simple book, you will know a lot more than about 95% of your compatriots. And it's not that hard to do. So Peter Kaufman has made it easy for you.
Yeah, I couldn't be more enthusiastic about what you suggested, and it's been done. And it's a sensational book, and anybody that reads it is going to learn a whole lot and about life, and you'll learn, even get you to read it, I'll tell you, you'll even learn something about making money. And it's right next door here. They haven't sold out.
I'm Ben Knoll, and I'm from Minneapolis. And first, I just wanted to thank you for providing your past annual letters to the shareholders, and Mr. Munger for providing your speech to the graduate students at the USC a couple years ago. Drawn a lot of insights from that, not only in investing, but also in my day job as a business manager. And I'm wondering if you could help me with my summer reading list and provide some additional suggestions for reading in the fields of investing and management, other than the standards of Graham and Fisher and so forth.
Charlie?
Yeah. I have recently read a new book twice, which I very seldom do. And that book is Guns, Germs, and Steel by Jared Diamond. And it's a marvelous book, and the way the guy's mind works would be useful in business. He's got a mind that is always asking why, and he's very good at coming up with answers. I would say it's the best work of its kind I have ever read.
I read a little easier book recently. I'm not even sure of the title. I don't pay much attention to titles when I get into the books, but it's something to the effect of the quotable Einstein. I mean, it's a lot of his commentary over the years, and it's great reading. The Fermat Theorem was the book, but that isn't the exact title either. But it's the story of the discovery of the answer on that. That's a very interesting book. One of our shareholders from Sweden gave me a copy of that when I was in New York, and I've enjoyed it.
Mr. Buffett, in the foreword to the 6th edition of Benjamin Graham's Security Analysis, you identified 4 books that you particularly cherish. 3 of these books were authored by Graham himself, and their influence on you is well known. The contributions of the 4th book to your thinking, however, that book was Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations, published in 1776. What that book meant to you is seldom discussed. So my question is, what did you learn from The Wealth of Nations, and how did it shape your investment and business philosophy?
Well, it doesn't shape my investment philosophy, but I certainly learned economics from it. And my friend Bill Gates gave me an original copy of it. Now, I was able to study it as Adam Smith wrote it in 1776. There's just, if you read Adam Smith, and if you read Keynes, Ricardo, and if you also read that little book we've got out there called Where Are the Customers' Yachts, you will have a lot of wisdom.
Adam Smith is one of those guys that's really worn well. I mean, he is rightly recognized as one of the wisest people that ever came along. And of course, the lessons that he taught way back then were taught again when communism failed so terribly, and people like Singapore and Taiwan and China and so forth came up so fast. The productive power of the capitalist system is simply unbelievable. And he understood that fully and early, and he's done a lot of good.
I took an idea of his on the specialization of labor, and he talked about people making pins or something, but I applied that actually to philanthropy. I mean, the idea that you let other people do what they're best at and stick with what you're best at, I've carried from mowing my lawn to philanthropy, and it's a wonderful thing to just shove off everything and saying somebody else is better than that, and than I am at that, and then work in the field that's most productive.